There's a kind of quiet that only comes after a storm. Not peaceful, exactly. Plus, more like the world holding its breath, waiting to see if the rain will return. That is the quiet Catherine, Princess of Wales, had been living inside for the better part of a year. And, when Mother's Day arrived in the United Kingdom on the morning of March 30, 2025, millions of people across the country opened their phones and waited. They had been waiting for a long time, actually. Longer than they might have admitted to themselves. Because there's something about Catherine that people feel connected to, even people who have never met her, never stood within 100 feet of her. She's, in some way that's hard to explain, one of those rare public figures who feels like a person rather than a performance. And, so when the storm broke over her life in early 2024, when everything turned upside down, the world felt it too. That Mother's Day morning, they wanted a sign that the storm had passed. What they got, was something they didn't expect at all. The story, to understand it fully, has to go back further than March 2025. It has to go back to the beginning of 2024, when the world was already buzzing with questions about the Princess of Wales. She had undergone planned abdominal surgery in January of that year, and Kensington Palace had said, simply and cleanly, that she would be out of the public eye until after Easter. Reasonable enough, which people respected that. But, then, weeks passed. Then, more weeks. And, in a world of social media and 24-hour news, weeks of silence about a public figure do not pass quietly. They accumulate. Plus, they generate noise. Every absence becomes a question, and questions without answers become theories, and theories in the wrong corners of the internet become something uglier than that. Then, came Mother's Day 2024. The palace, perhaps trying to reassure the public, perhaps trying to do something warm and normal in an abnormal stretch of time, released a photograph. It showed Catherine with her 3 children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, all of them together, smiling, a family portrait designed to say everything is fine, we're here, we're okay. The world exhaled. And, then, the world looked more closely. Almost immediately, something felt wrong. Photo editors at major news agencies, people whose entire professional lives involve staring at images until they give up their secrets, started to notice things. The alignment of Charlotte's left hand didn't look right. Elements of the photo appeared shifted or smoothed in ways that photographs of real moments do not look. One, in my opinion, by one, the major wire services, Associated Press, Reuters, AFP, pulled the photo. They do not do that lightly, and, that is, within the world of photojournalism, a significant act. It said, in plain professional language, that this image can't be trusted as a document of reality. The palace then did something that only made the noise louder. They confirmed it. Catherine released a statement on the social media platform that was once called Twitter, and she wrote, simply and honestly, that she does occasionally experiment with editing, the way many amateur photographers do, and that she was sorry for any confusion the photo had caused. It was a gracious statement, and it was a human statement. But it landed in a moment when the world was already anxious about her, already full of theories, already primed to interpret everything as a clue. Instead of quieting the noise, it amplified it. And then, just days later, the noise was replaced by something that made every other concern feel suddenly, dramatically smaller. On March 22, 2024, Catherine appeared in a video. She was outdoors, in the soft green light that belongs to English late afternoons. Actually, she looked calm. She looked like herself in the way a person looks like themselves after they've been through something that changed them. And, she told the world what she had been facing. She had been diagnosed with cancer, and she was in the early stages of preventive chemotherapy. She was okay, she said. She was going to be okay. Plus, but she needed time. She needed privacy. She needed to protect her children, George and Charlotte and Louis, and to help them understand what was happening to their mother in a way that wouldn't frighten them more than necessary. Actually, the world went quiet. The noise about the photograph, which had felt so urgent just days before, became instantly irrelevant. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the woman in the video, the woman sitting in a garden, telling the truth about something terrifying with a steadiness that most people couldn't have managed. What mattered was what she said about her children, about explaining the diagnosis to them carefully, about reassuring them that she was going to be okay. That actually, single sentence landed differently for every parent who heard it. Because every parent who has ever had to tell a child something frightening knows exactly what that costs. The video spread across every platform, into every time zone, into conversations between strangers on public transportation and between friends at kitchen tables. People cried. People who had been skeptical of the palace, people who had been spinning theories online, people who had been critical for months, went quiet and felt something more honest than opinions. The months that followed were hard. Catherine stepped back from everything, no engagements, no public appearances, no photographs. Only the occasional, in my opinion, carefully worded update from Kensington Palace, and, once, in June, a brief statement from Catherine herself. She was making progress, she wrote, which there were good days and bad days. On the bad days she felt weak and tired and had to give in to what her body needed. On the good days she wanted to make the most of feeling well. She posted a photograph with that statement, taken outdoors, in the natural surroundings she had always loved. She looked, I guess, quieter than usual. More contained. But, there, behind the containment, was something that hadn't broken. Summer passed. Then, came September 2024, and, with it a video that the world had been hoping for. Catherine stood in front of a camera and told everyone that she had completed her course of preventive chemotherapy. She was TBH, not done recovering, she was careful to say. This was not the ending of anything, just the turning of a corner. But, she was looking ahead now. She was grateful. She was emotional in the way a person is emotional when they've been holding something very heavy for a long time and have finally been allowed to set it down. The public responded actually, in kind. The outpouring of support was enormous, genuine, and, in many ways more personal than the usual royal well-wishing that follows good news from the palace. These messages were different, and they were from people who had been scared, and who were now, together, letting out a breath. The rest of 2024 was a careful return. A carol service here, a Christmas appearance there. Catherine moved back into the world the way someone does when they've learned not to take any of it for granted, slowly, thoughtfully, with the kind of presence that comes only from having been away. She was different, most people agreed, not less, but somehow more. Look, more real. More grounded, sort of, which more herself in a way that was difficult to define but easy to feel. Then, January 2025 brought the news that everything had been building toward. In a statement timed to her visit to the Royal Marsden, the cancer hospital that had treated her, Catherine announced that she was in remission. She was careful with her language, as she always is. She said it was a relief. She said it takes time to adjust to a new normal. She said she remained focused on recovery. She thanked the staff of the hospital with a warmth that didn't sound like the formal gratitude of a royal patron. It sounded like the gratitude of someone whose life those people had helped save. Along with the announcement, she became a joint patron of the Royal Marsden, a commitment she described with purpose and real feeling, saying she hoped that by supporting their research and promoting well-being for patients and families, they might save more lives and change the experience of everyone touched by cancer. February came. World Cancer Day. Catherine posted a photograph that her son Prince Louis had taken of her, standing in the woods with her arms spread wide, face lifted, the image of someone who had come through something and was now standing on the other side of it. The caption reads simply, "Do not forget to nurture all that which lies beyond the disease." It was a message to other cancer patients as much as it was a statement about her own life. People saved it to their phones. They sent it to family members who were sick. They printed it out and put it on walls. A photograph taken by a 7-year-old boy of his mother in the woods became, in the strange, tender way that only genuinely human moments can, something that belonged to everyone. Spring came. Days grew longer. Plus, the kind of light that belongs to the end of March arrived over England, soft and slightly gold, the light that feels like a promise after winter. And, with it came Mother's Day, and, with it came millions of people opening their phones, waiting to see what Catherine would do this year, waiting to see what she would say. They weren't waiting for anything dramatic, and they weren't expecting a statement or a press conference or a major announcement. They were waiting the way you wait for a friend to come back from something hard, not with fireworks, but with the simple hope that they would show up, that they would be okay, that the things they loved before the storm would still matter to them on the other side of it. What Catherine did on the morning of March 30th, 2025, was not what most of them expected. It was quieter than that, and more beautiful for being quiet, and more powerful for being unexpected. And it told the world something about who she had become in the year that had changed everything. People who follow the royal family on social media had become accustomed, over the years, to a particular kind of Mother's Day post from Catherine, Princess of Wales. It followed a reliable and comforting formula. There would be a photograph, usually taken at one of their family homes, usually showing her with George and Charlotte and Louis, possibly with William somewhere at the edges of the frame. The children would be a little taller each time than people remembered them being. Someone would be pulling a face, or laughing, or caught mid-motion. In that way children always are in honest photographs because they do not know how to hold completely still. The image would be warm, intentionally imperfect in the way that only carefully staged warmth can be, and it would serve as a kind of annual reassurance to the public. The Wales family is fine. The children are growing. The princess is here. Everything is as it should be. That formula had worked for years. It, I think, had built something, actually, a specific kind of affection between Catherine and the people who followed her, an affection built on these small and regular glimpses into a life that was royal but also recognizable. You saw the children getting older and felt time passing the way you feel it with your own family. You saw her in the garden or in a field and thought about your own weekends. That was the gift of those photographs, not the royalty of them but the humanity. Then, 2024 happened, and the formula broke, and it broke badly. The edited photograph released on Mother's Day 2024 hadn't been a small thing to move past. The controversy had spiraled through every form of media for days. It had coincided with weeks of public anxiety about Catherine's whereabouts and health. And then, within days, it had been overshadowed by something far more serious, the cancer announcement. Which made the photograph seem like the least important thing in the world. But it didn't disappear from memory entirely. It lingered in the background of the public conversation. It had become, for better or worse, part of the story. And, by the time Mother's Day 2025 arrived, the people watching were aware, even if they didn't say it explicitly, that this year's post carried weight it wouldn't have carried before. There was a before and an after now. Like, the photo scandal. The diagnosis. The chemotherapy. The remission. All of that lived inside the frame of whatever Catherine would choose to share on March 30th, 2025. What she shared was a video. Not, I think, a photograph of her children. Not a posed family portrait. Plus, not something designed to prove normalcy or signal happiness. Instead, she posted a short film, and the film didn't feature faces at all. It featured the earth. It showed a meadow in full morning light, the kind of light that's almost liquid, the way it moves through tall grass. It showed waves breaking against a coastline, not dramatically but patiently, the way the ocean always has and always will regardless of what happens to any of us. It showed fog rolling down the side of a hill in slow gray curtains. It showed a tiny ladybird making its way along a single blade of grass with a kind of focused determination that was, in its smallness, oddly moving. A daisy unfurled its petals in time-lapse, the petals opening the way things open when they are ready, not before. Somewhere in the footage, a field of wildflowers moved in a wind that the camera couldn't show but only record the effects of. Two clips in the video were different from the rest. In one, Catherine was standing with her palms pressed gently against the bark of a tree. Just that. No pose. No performance, and her hands against the tree the way a person puts their hands against something solid when they need to feel that something solid exists. In the other clip, William walked barefoot through long grass, the couple's two dogs moving around his feet, and there was something about the bare feet and the high grass and the unhurried pace of it that felt deeply private in a way that 100 formal photographs never had. The caption, written in her own voice and signed simply with the letter C, read, "Over the past year, nature has been our sanctuary." This Mother's Day, let's celebrate Mother Nature and recognize how our bond with the natural world can help not only nurture our inner selves, but remind us too of the role we play within the rich blend of life. That letter C at the end of the post was, for many people who followed these things, its own small signal. It meant she had written this herself, and not a press officer. Not a palace communications team drafting in her name. Horror. The word sanctuary was hers. The feeling behind it was hers. And it landed the way things land when they are genuinely meant. The response was immediate and it was not what anyone would have predicted from a video that contained no faces, no children, no news, and no announcement. It went everywhere. Within hours the comments were accumulating in the thousands, and they weren't the polite, formulaic comments that public figures usually receive, the lovely photo or beautiful family varieties. These were different, and they were personal. They were the kind of comments people write when something catches them off guard by being true. One person wrote that Catherine had reminded them of what actually matters. Another, I guess, said that after a year of watching the Princess of Wales fight her way back from something terrifying, seeing her love for the natural world still intact, seeing that nothing had taken that from her, made them cry in a way they hadn't expected to on a Sunday morning. Royal fans who had been following every development of the past year wrote about relief, about gratitude, about the specific emotion that arrives when someone you've been worried about turns out to be okay in a deeper way than just physically okay. A royal commentator said what many people were feeling when she noted that Catherine appeared to be looking forward to everything now, her eye on the horizon rather than on the ground. The choice of subject was not random or accidental. Those who had followed Catherine's public work over the years knew that her connection to the natural world was long-standing and genuine. Back in 2019, she had designed the Back to Nature garden at the Chelsea Flower Show, a space built around the idea that children develop better when they've access to the outdoors, with streams and dens and rope swings and all the messy, unstructured freedom that wild spaces provide. She had spoken repeatedly, in speeches and public engagements, about the power of nature to support mental health, to help children grow, to give families a shared language that doesn't require words. This was not a theme she had picked up recently. It had been running through her work for years, like a thread woven into everything else. But the past year had made it personal in a different way. In the months of her treatment, in the long stretches of time at home away from the public eye, nature hadn't been a policy position or a campaign talking point. It had been medicine. The photograph Lewis had taken of her in the woods in February, arms spread wide, face turned up, had said as much without saying anything. The video she released for Mother's Day said it again, more gently, more completely. Here is what kept me. Here is where I went when everything else fell away. Here is what still matters, which there was one more layer to the day that added texture to everything Catherine had done. Her Royal Foundation Center for Early Childhood, the organization she chairs and, which focuses on the critical importance of the first years of a child's life, posted its own Mothering Sunday message on social media. It read, "Today we celebrate every mother, carer and caregiver whose steady love gives children the foundations to thrive. Here's to all who nurture and guide with the quiet acts that shape the next generation." Happy Mother's Day. The phrase quiet acts carried weight. It names something that's true about most of what mothers do, which is that it's invisible, unglamorous, repetitive, unrecorded, and completely essential. It names something that Catherine herself had been living in a very specific way during the past year, the quiet work of getting well, of explaining hard things to 3 children in terms they could hold, of showing up for the people she loved on the days when it cost everything just to show up. The message from her foundation didn't reference any of this explicitly. Basically, it didn't need to. Plus, the quiet acts did the work all by themselves. And then, there was William's post. The Prince of Wales, on the same morning, shared something that took people by surprise in a different way. He posted a photograph that had never been seen before. It showed Princess Diana, his mother, standing in a garden at Highgrove in 1984, with a small boy beside her in a field of flowers. The boy was William. He was 2 years old, which he was standing next to the woman who wouldn't be with him 30 years later, on the Mother's Days that would come without her. He wrote, "Remembering my mother, today and every day. Thinking of all those who are remembering someone they love today. Happy Mother's Day." The response to William's post was enormous. People wrote about Diana. People wrote about their own lost mothers. People wrote about what it means to have a photograph of someone you love taken when they were still alive and the world was still ordinary and neither of you knew yet what was coming. The image of the little boy and his mother in the garden at Highgrove moved freely across the internet, carrying with it a grief that was 30 years old and still completely current, the way grief is when it's real. The two posts, Catherine's video and William's photograph, were different from each other in almost every way. One was about the present, and one was about the past. One was about survival and renewal, which one was about loss and memory. But, together, on the same morning, they said something about this family that felt more honest than anything a communications team could have planned. They said that these are people who have been through things that changed them, things they carry, and that they are still here, still finding meaning, still reaching toward what has always sustained them. Fans watching from around the world sat with both posts through the afternoon of that Sunday, and what many of them felt was something that doesn't have a single clean word for it. It was admiration, yes, and affection, and relief, but underneath all of that it was something closer to recognition. The recognition that comes when someone public does something genuinely human and you see in it a reflection of your own life, your own losses, your own ways of getting through things. That is a rare thing to feel about people you will never meet. Catherine and William, on the morning of March 30, 2025, made millions of people feel it. But the story was not quite finished yet. Because what Catherine did on Mother's Day was not an isolated moment. It was the latest chapter in something longer, something that had been quietly building. Since January, since remission, since the photo of her in the woods with her arms spread wide. And what it was building toward was something that would become clear in the weeks that followed, as she stepped further back into the world, as she continued to show people who she had become on the other side of the hardest year of her life. There's a particular kind of courage that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wear a uniform or carry a flag or come with a press release. It shows up in small choices made quietly, in the way someone moves through a room, in the things they choose to say and the things they choose to leave unsaid. It shows up in a video of a ladybird on a blade of grass, posted on a Sunday morning, signed with a single letter. That is the kind of courage people had been watching in Catherine, Princess of Wales, for over a year. And, on Mother's Day 2025, and, in the days and weeks that followed, they began to understand something that they hadn't quite found words for before. They began to understand that what she had done during the hardest year of her life was not just survive it. She had, somehow, quietly and, without fanfare, become more herself. That isn't a small thing. Most people who face a serious illness come out the other side changed, and the change isn't always upward. Fear can shrink people, uncertainty can make them cautious in ways that cost them things they loved before. Pain can create sort of distance between who someone was and who they are able to be afterward. That isn't weakness. That is basically just the honest physics of what illness does to a life. But, now and then, in cases that are hard to explain fully, a person comes through the fire and finds that the fire burned away only what was not essential. What was left is the same person, but concentrated. More clear. More themselves than they had room to be before. The people watching Catherine in the weeks after Mother's Day 2025 saw something like that. Her return to public life was not rushed or stiff or performative in the way that returns from difficulty sometimes are. There, was no overcorrecting, no aggressive projection of normalcy, no visible effort to prove anything to anyone. She appeared in public and she was present. That sounds simple, and it was not simple at all. Presence, real presence, is one of the rarest things a public figure can offer, because public life tends to train people out of it, tends to sand down the specific edges of a person and replace them with the smooth surface of image management. Catherine had always had more of it than most. After everything she had been through, she had even more. In the immediate sort of aftermath of the Mother's Day post, the conversation that spread through royal commentary and social media and newspaper columns was not primarily about the royal family in the political or institutional sense. It was personal. It was about what it means to step back into life after you've almost lost it. It was about what it means to choose, on a day that society designates for celebrating motherhood, not to perform motherhood for public consumption but to share something true about what had kept you alive. Because that's what the video was, at its core. It was Catherine telling the world, in the language she had always trusted most, the language of the outdoors and the growing things and the patient, indifferent beauty of the natural world, that she was here. That she had come through. That what she had loved before still held. Royal commentator, I guess, Jenny Bond, speaking to the press around this time, put into words what many people were feeling when she said there was no doubt that every milestone had become extra special for the Wales family as they moved further from the day Catherine received her diagnosis. She described the princess as looking radiant and back to her vibrant self. Those, to be fair, words, radiant and vibrant, could have sounded like the usual language people use about royals, polished and press-ready and not quite real. But, in this context, they landed differently. They landed with the weight of contrast, the weight of the fact that there had been months when no one was sure what to expect, when updates were sparse and carefully worded and impossible to fully read. Against that background, radiant was not a decoration. It was a data point. Catherine's long-standing connection to the natural world, which the Mother's Day video had spotlighted again for people who may not have known its depth, had been a thread running through her public work for years in ways that went beyond symbolism. The Back to Nature garden she had co-designed for the Chelsea Flower Show in 2019 was not a one-off project. It had been a statement of belief, a belief that children who grow up with access to wild spaces, who are allowed to climb, dig and get well, muddy and discover things at their own pace, develop in ways that children deprived of those experiences do not. It was connected to everything she had been building through her Royal Foundation Center for Early Childhood, the case she had been making for years that what happens in the first 5 years of a child's life shapes everything that comes after, and that the environment a child grows up in, including the physical environment, the actual earth and grass and weather, is part of that shaping. This was not abstract for her. She honestly had raised 3 children in it. George and Charlotte and Louis had grown up in houses with gardens. Trips pretty much to Norfolk and an understanding that the outdoors was not a backdrop to life but part of its substance. The photograph Louis had taken of his mother in the woods, arms wide, face up, had said something about that too. A child who takes a photograph like that of his parent is a child who has been given language for that kind of moment. He knew what that moment meant for her. He saw it and he captured it. That isn't something that happens by accident. The months following Mother's Day 2025 brought Catherine back into the world in the way that felt right rather than scheduled. She attended engagements, which she was photographed. She spoke at events. But what people noticed was not so much what she was doing as how she was doing it. There was an ease to her that hadn't always been there in the same way. Ease is complicated for royals, particularly for those who married into the family rather than being born into it. The sort of expectations are precise and numerous and sometimes contradictory. You must be warm but not overly familiar. Accessible but appropriately distant. Modern but respectful of tradition. Real but polished. Catherine had worked through those contradictions for years with skill and grace, but skill and grace both carry a cost, a low-level tension that lives in the body of anyone who's perpetually performing a version of themselves. What people saw in her now was something less costly. Something that suggested the past year, for all its terror, had simplified things. Had made certain things feel less important than they once had. Had given her permission she may not have known she was waiting for. The gesture she made on Mother's Day 2025, because that's ultimately what it was, a gesture rather than a statement, a reaching toward rather than a declaration, resonated with people in part because of what it chose not to be. It honestly chose not to be an apology for the year before. It chose not to be a reassurance that everything was normal. It chose not to be a photograph of happy children designed to signal stability. It was none of those things. It was a woman saying, "Here's what held me, here's what I love, here's what still exists on the other side of the worst thing that happened to me." And, in its willingness to say that simply, without performance or explanation, it trusted its audience with something real. Trust is a word worth sitting with in this context. The relationship between the royal family and the public is built on a specific kind of trust that's different from most relationships between public figures and audiences. It is more intimate in some ways and more formal in others. It involves a certain amount of projection, a certain amount of the public finding in royals what they need to find there. Stability, continuity, the reassurance that the institutions of the country are intact. But, it also, at its best, involves genuine human connection of the kind that crosses every constructed distance. Catherine, over the course of her time as Princess of Wales, had built an unusual amount of that second kind of trust. The cancer year had tested it and, then, deepened it, because what had tested it was something so plainly and honestly human that it stripped away every layer of royal image and left a person visible underneath. The Mother's Day post was the product of that stripped-down visibility. It didn't pretty much try to rebuild the old image. It offered something newer and less constructed. A video of fog and ocean and a woman's hands on a tree. A caption about sanctuary. A TBH, single letter at the end of it. William's post that same morning added its own dimension to the day. The photograph of Diana and the small boy in the garden was an act of mourning and remembrance that had always been part of his Mother's Days. His children, George and Charlotte and Louis, made cards for Diana each year. The family had found ways of keeping her present even in her absence, of teaching the children that their grandmother was real and loved and worth remembering even though they would never know her. The photograph William posted in 2025 was taken at a moment when Diana was alive and William was 2 years old and neither of them knew yet what the story of their lives would turn out to be. There's a particular kind of grief in images like that, the grief of knowing what the people in them didn't know at the time. People felt it fully when they saw it. Together, the two posts created something that went beyond royal news or social media content or public relations. They created, on an ordinary Sunday morning in March, a portrait of two people who had been through enormous things and had come out the other side still turned toward each other, still turned toward their children, still capable of being moved by the world. That isn't nothing. In a time when the public life of public figures tends to feel relentlessly managed and strategically calculated, something that feels genuinely unmanaged, something that feels true rather than produced, becomes significant just by existing. The fans who responded to Catherine's Mother's Day gesture in 2025 were responding to exactly that. To the fact that it was true. To the fact that it came from somewhere real. To the fact that a woman who had spent a year walking through the hardest landscape of her life chose, on the morning designated for celebrating motherhood, not to look back at the hard year but forward, toward the growing things, toward the world that had held her steady when everything else was uncertain, toward the light moving through the grass of a Norfolk meadow in the way it has always moved, patient and indifferent and utterly beautiful. She signed the pretty much post with a C. Just that. One letter. Everything else, the diagnosis and the chemotherapy and the fear and the reconstruction and the long quiet months and the remission and the relief, all of it lived behind that single letter. All of it had brought her to this morning and this video and this message about sanctuary and the natural world and the tapestry of life. She had come through, she was here. And the simplicity of that single letter, small as it was, held more weight than anything that could have been said more elaborately. Millions of people read it and understood. That is the kind of thing that doesn't need explanation. That is the kind of thing that lands before you've finished processing it. And, long after the headlines moved on, long after the weekend ended and the week began and the world turned back to its usual urgent noise, that video stayed with people. They went back to it. They showed it for what it's worth to their mothers, their daughters, their friends who were sick or recovering or frightened. They shared it to be fair, the way you share things that feel like gifts rather than content. Catherine hadn't made a speech. She hadn't held a press conference. She hadn't issued a statement about resilience or recovery or the importance of hope. She had posted a video of the Earth doing what the Earth does, quietly, steadily, season after season, without asking permission or needing an audience. She had signed it with a C. And it had been, in its entirety, exactly enough.